Just have a short preface here, introduction. From the military powder plant in Indiana on Route 62 to the glass manufacturing and steamboat outfitting businesses of New Albany, south to the great industries of Louisville, Standard Sanitary, Naval Ordnance, South Yards of the Louisville and Nashville Railroad, and the giant breweries and distilleries, Louisville and southern Indiana, for most of their existence, has been an epicenter of manufacturing new products and modifying existing ones. Even though we've seen a decline in the number and types of industries, we are, I believe, on the threshold of a renaissance of industry like never imagined. This new industry will not be as labor intensive nor threatening to our environment as the ones from days of old, but through new methods of building products and an increasing knowledge base, we'll be able to do more with less, providing the nation with all that constitutes that American dream that we talk about. Let's proceed to a discussion about what has already been here, what's here now, and what industries are new on the horizon. My inspiration for industry came from my father, a lifelong skilled machinist, tool and die maker, and welder, shown here with a Tree brand milling machine. Much industry has vanished from our landscape. Shown here is the parking lot of the last location for Enro Shirt Company on Leghorn Drive. Here is the desolate parking lot for the huge Henry Vogt Company, which was located on 10th and 11th Street south of Broadway to Ormsby. Follow up to the Vogt Brothers Machine Shop came from the Vogt Brothers Machine Shop that was on 14th and Main. It was Henry Vogt, his brother Adam, and his brother's son, Clarence. Early industry was heavily labor intensive, as shown by these workers in the foundry at Standard Sanitation Company. Modern industry today, let me get my little pointer thing going here. There we go. The modern industry of today is largely based around what is referred to as CNC machines, computer controlled, or technically computer numeric control, which has greatly altered and improved the repeatable functions and reduced the labor needed to build products. Machinists such as my father would be astonished to see the advances that would prevail in manufacturing. Here at a cigarette processing plant, this is in the early 1930s, 1934, you have workers making metal cigarette cases. This is obviously before OSHA came to town. No protective barriers, not even safety glasses. Ouch! Factories were dangerous places. Overshot it a little bit there. The Louisville Chair Company of 1367 South 11th, shown in 1957, the chair covering area. There were at different times two companies with that name. Nancy Harris, who is sitting right here, is sitting on a chair. Does it feel a little rickety to you? Yeah, if you hold that up, you'll see that it says the Louisville Chair Company underneath it. Amen. There it is, right there. Louisville Chair Company. That's probably 1940s chair. It came from the Louisville Chair Company, 10th Street. It's probably the only one in Louisville. And if my wife has her way, there won't be any left in Louisville. Okay. What is the history of this so-called industrial revolution? Well, several things took place in a relatively short period of time to create the genesis of industry. Improvement of raw materials. mainly the creation of steel, an alloy of iron and carbon, which gave great strengths to materials used in building products. You know, we hear about how carbon is dangerous to us today. I don't care where you are sleeping or sitting at any given moment, you're never more than about 3 or 4 feet from carbon. It's such an essential part, and it's essential to life. So I'm not sure where all that comes from, but anyhow. The next factor is the invention by James Watt in 1765 of the steam engine in Scotland to allow powering of motion-based machines, replacing the uncertainties of animal power. The invention of the spinning jenny and power loom for the textile industry. 3 major factors. James Watt's steam engine, similar to this model, this picture was taken in Madrid at a museum. As a tribute to his invention, a unit of electrical energy was named after him. Fritz Lang's silent film, Metropolis, exemplified factory life during the Industrial Revolution. This movie was 1927. Proliferation of industry, especially in the U.S., started around 1840. Here are several large industries in our city that became vital for many years. The story of industrial development, of course, cannot be told without credit to the vision and expertise of those who created it. The captains of industry built the sprawling campuses that housed it. Most often came from the imagination in any one industry of a single individual. We were fortunate here to have these great individuals in our midst. In this map, it shows the primary industrial corridor in the early development of large factories and production facilities in Louisville. 6th Street to 30th, east and west, and Broadway to Algonquin Parkway, north and south. We did not have so-called industrial parks at the time, but the principal neighborhoods where industrial buildings were located would later be known as St. Joseph, Meriwether, Parkland, Park Hill, and California. Buildings for industry were large and bold in detail, such as the Schmutz Manufacturing Building shown here at 13th and Main Street. Schutz manufactured all kinds of machinery for the printing industry. Vogt Manufacturing Building at 9th and Ormsby, vertically integrated manufacturing plant where they made gate valves, fire hydrants, ice and refrigeration equipment, and more. I'm hoping that there will be adaptive reuse to this building and something can be done with it, maybe apartments or condominiums, who knows. It just sits like this today. At this point, I'll describe these companies, some of these companies that became pivotal to the city of Louisville and southern Indiana. Many products altered our landscape and were or are manufactured in Louisville. We had at least 6 bicycle manufacturing companies. Here's a bicycle expert here. Aquila Wheel Company, Albion Company, Denard Manufacturing, Hendon Rockledge, Harbison and Gathright, W.C. Wayne Manufacturing, and T.S. Evans in New Albany. The penny farthing, or sometimes known as the ordinary bicycle. We associate our area with Ford automobiles, which have been part of our industrial base for more than 100 years, starting with an assembly plant on 9th Street, followed by 3rd and Breckenridge in 1912. In 1916, a minute here, 1916, they opened a plant at 3rd and Eastern Parkway, and in 1925 on Southwestern Parkway for Model Ts and Model As. Model Ts in the 3rd and and Eastern Parkway location. Ford built a new assembly plant on Fern Valley Road in 1955 to build that car that they had great celebrity, great fanfare, called the Edsel. In 1955, they built that. In 1969, they built the truck plant on Chamberlain Lane. The Southwestern Parkway Ford plant built over 90,000 Jeeps for the World War II war effort. By no means did we have only Ford in our city. Kentucky Wagon Company, founded in 1878, originally built horse-drawn wagons. But in 1916, they expanded into automobile production, building the Dixie Flyer, shown on the left, and the Roadster, called the Firefly. I want you to know that there is at least one artifact extant related to the Dixie Flyer and Kentucky Wagon. That is part of a brick of the main assembly plant, which I went and retrieved myself when it was demolished about 15 years ago. So if you want to see a nice brick, here it is. I'll have it available for you. The Roadster, called the Firefly. There were 7,000 Firefly sports versions shown on the right there that were built, but only a handful exist today. The Kentucky Trailer Company, successor to Kentucky Wagon, now located in Riverport, has a Firefly Roadster showed here in the entrance foyer of their company. The only extant building from the 32-acre Kentucky Wagon plant, which was on 3rd Street adjacent to the Ford Motor plant, is the Forge. The land has been purchased by the University of Louisville for future expansion. The Ohio Falls Motor Company on Vincennes Street in New Albany manufactured the Pilgrim automobile starting around 1913. They advertised it as, I don't know why this is significant, but they advertised it as a $2,250 car for $1,800. I mean, you expect that much of a discount when you go to buy a car. They also built a truck version. The Johns, shown on the right, was built between 1909 and 1912 in New Albany by the American Automobile Manufacturing Company. Only one is known to exist today. The Collar Company, early 1900 to about 1926, was a car body manufacturer in New Albany. The Ferdinand Collar home still stands today. The plant is long gone. They built many bodies for the Ford Motor Company, but were heavily involved with the Durant Company. The Durant automobile was built in New York City between 1921 and 1932 by William Durant, who was a former president of General Motors, with the idea of competing with GM. A number of versions were built, including this example, with undercarriages manufactured by the Mengel Wood Products Company of Louisville in a specially built factory on Industry Road near the University of Louisville. Speaking of the Mengel Company, here's Charles C. Mengel, president of the company he founded in 1877, which manufactured specialty wood products. The three brothers, C.C., which is Charles C., shown here, Herbert and Clarence, along with 600 employees, became a corporate industry manufacturing shipping containers under the name Mengel Box Company, which you can see in the masonry relief there. Their plant, 1247 through 99 South 12th Street, was a castle-like building that looked more like a fortress. At one point, they had a fleet of steamships that traveled to northern Africa and other points around the world to purchase hardwoods. They even had a company town, Manglewood, Tennessee, with a sawmill and logging operations. There's another view of it. Along with the Wood Mosaic Company on Crittenden Drive and the Baldwin Company in Cincinnati, they provided the materials and expertise for the wooden experimental cargo plane known as the C-76 Caravan, shown here. They were afraid, U.S. government was afraid that we were going to run out of aluminum bauxite. It was a worldwide shortage of it, so they got this idea about building airplanes, particularly cargo airplanes, out of wood. It really didn't work out too well. They only made, I think, built about 9 of these planes, and the very first one crashed and killed a whole bunch of people in Oklahoma. And no slight against Oklahoma, but anyhow, this airplane was known as the C-76 Caravan. The Caravan shown here was built under government contract in this plant located on Crittenden Drive in the early 1940s. It was operated by Curtiss Wright Aircraft Company. It was headquartered in St. Louis. After the war, Mengel continued in business by building mostly furniture products. The Curtiss Wright plant became home to International Harvester. By the time the Mengel Brothers Company was in 1960, they were purchased by the Container Corporation of America. By that time, their employee base was close to 6,000 with a worldwide presence. There they are in the furniture making business after the war. Shown in this woodcut is the Rempelmeyer Furniture Company located on 15th Street at Rowan in downtown Louisville, and they had a store on 4th Street. They were in business in Louisville starting in 1852, building bank furniture, store fixtures, church pews, and other furniture and wood products. Here's the building as it appears today. I do not have a closure date, but John Henry Wampelmeyer died in 1905, so I assume early 1900s. You wouldn't think of Louisville as a location for making shoes, yet there were a number of shoemaking operations in the city, numbering over 25 in a 200-year period. Quast Shoe Company, 1446 Levering Street, 1 block west of 6th. Quast Shoe was probably the largest local manufacturer of shoes. Their 3-story building, built in 1867, made women's and children's shoes, boots, and other leather goods. Their brands included Ben-Hur, Mammoth Cave, Big Brother, Bluegrass Bell, and the Gladmore line of children's shoes. This is the location of Quast Shoe today. I don't think there's much going on there. There's one of their advertisements. No shoddy workmanship, folks. The Granger Company, in business from 1833 to 1932 between father and son, also known as Phoenix Foundry and Machine Shop. This 100-year-old company, a forge and builder of structural ironwork, was a mainstay of support for the Louisville construction industry. William H. Granger, there on the left, that's as close as we'll get to seeing him, I guess, 1808 to 1899, and son Charles, 1854 to 1923. Both men were very involved in civic affairs. Charles even becoming the mayor of Louisville between 1901 and 1905. Their company provided steel and furnishings for the Sealback Hotel, Rialto Theater, Speed Building, Masonic Temple, and on and on. Granger and Company was located where the Kentucky Lottery building sits today at 10th and Main. Charles T. and Samuel Ballard founded the Ballard Flour Mills in 1850 at 912 East Broadway. In the latter 1800s, Samuel Thurston Ballard, who was also active in politics, who became lieutenant governor, became the president of the company. At their peak, they had 570 employees. You go back there, I don't know if probably a lot of you would remember that facility. It was huge. Gone now, though. In 1951, the Ballard Flour Mill became part of the Pillsbury Company, so in a sense, I guess they're still extant. Louisville Clothing Company was one of over 60 clothing manufacturers that existed in Louisville and southern Indiana. LCC was established in 1899 at 709 through 13 West Market Street. They made suits and trousers with 150 employees and 100 sewing machines. Enro Shirt Company, I showed you the parking lot earlier, started by Nathan Rosenblum in 1919 at 1010 South Preston Street. The name is an acronym of his first and last name. The company is owned offshore today and they have no manufacturing presence in the good old USA. Something I feel sure Nathan would not be too excited about. George W. Cuscaden, the ice cream king, and he was the inventor of the machine and process still used today to make Neapolitan brick ice cream. In 1875, George and his mother, who had come to Louisville from Cincinnati, opened an ice cream factory at 619 South 2nd Street in Louisville. He conceived of the machine something reminiscent of Houdini's escape devices. I'd say closest to that thing he called the water torture chamber. There it is. To make 4 types of Neapolitan brick ice cream. He patented it in 1901. His popular brick ice cream machine is still known as the Cuscaden method of making ice cream. Today it's computer controlled. Jacob Ettinger, maker of carriages and wagons. We had many of these manufacturers in Louisville. Similar to the many buggy and carriage builders and modifiers of horse-drawn devices, Ettinger went into business in 1867 at 1010 Story Avenue, later moving to the northeast corner of Main and Campbell Streets. Kiss Me Gum Manufacturer, 709 East Broadway, known technically as the American Chicle Company. They operated in Louisville from 1895 well into the 1900s. 2 other gum manufacturers, Best Gum Company on 22nd Street, and I hope I get this right, and Colgan Taffy Tolu Chewing Gum at 10th and Walnut. Advertisements for Kiss Me Gum Company were replete with clever little poems, most of them about love and relationships. Continental Railroad cars were a specialty rail car built in the 1900s. They were located in Highland Park area of Louisville, 116 Wabasso Street. The C. Lee Cook Company in business, I'm fascinated by this man and this company, in business from 1888 to the present day, was conceived of by no less than Charles Lee Cook himself. who suffered many physical infirmities during his lifetime. At the age of 14, his family moved from New Albany to the Portland area of Louisville, just adjacent to the Kentucky and Indiana railroad tracks. From his home, he would watch the steam leak around the engine's pistons of these engines, railroad engines. As he got older, he would try methods to recover power from steam engine pistons, culminating in a design that he patented, which was eventually incorporated not only in steam engines, but anywhere a seal is needed in piston power. He ended up with 20 patents and a huge factory in Louisville located at 916 South 8th Street, near where he lived, which was here, at 6th and Ormsby. That home is still there. It looks just like that today. Even though he didn't receive any formal education beyond the age of 7, as an adult he learned several languages, becoming a patron of the Louisville School of Art and was a contributor to Simmons University and other civil rights causes. His company, Cook Compression, now a subsidiary of Dover Corporation, has relocated to the Riverport area of Jeffersonville, Indiana. They have a worldwide presence with several hundred employees at the Jeffersonville location. Also, he had, you can barely see it, there was a building attached on the rear of his house where he had weekly debate sessions. They'd invite political people and educators, and it usually ended up, I'm sure, as a shouting match. Well, today people would bring their guns probably, but it was much like that park in Chicago where you had the soapbox thing that people could come up anytime. They had a PA system there and they could vent their grievances. Well, that's what he did. And I think it really helped him to achieve the level of education that he had. Star Glass Works, a major source of plate glass, bottles, fruit jars, and mirrors, was started in New Albany by John Ford, shown here on the left, in a huge facility on Pearl Street. He would later move to Pittsburgh, where he started the company Libby Owens Ford and sold out his interests to this other gentleman, Washington DePaul, I'm sorry. DePaul was also well known as a benefactor to the Methodist Church. DePaul University today is named for him. Glass manufacturing fell on hard times, and by the end of the first decade of the 1900s, had just about ceased to exist on the manufacturing level. In our last hope for humanity, musical instruments, Louisville and southern Indiana had a number of musical instrument manufacturers, especially in the percussion area. Early on, there were a number of piano and pianoforte manufacturers. As early as 1847, the Peters, Craig and Company were building pianos, and J. Weckerly Company building reed organs. I have records of at least 15 piano and organ manufacturers that existed right up to the current day, with Weber and Borney Pipe Organ Company that's in business presently. From 1871 until 1944, the largest pipe organ manufacturer in the city of Louisville was the Pilcher Company. It was started by Henry Pilcher in Dover, England in 1822. He moved the operation to Chicago 10 years later, and following the 1871 Chicago fire, located to Louisville at 914 Mason Avenue, just adjacent to Logan Street. The largest Pilcher pipe organ ever built still resides in Louisville's Memorial Auditorium. This is a picture here of the Pilcher factory, and I think most of those buildings are gone. I know, I'm not sure, but I think there's maybe one that's still extant. Other major pipe organ builders were August Bronte, Louisville Pipe Organ Company, and Steiner Rec. Of note as well is the Elliott Drum Company of Louisville, who built many types of drums at their 2 locations, but mainly at 306 South 3rd Street. There's an Elliott snare drum on display at Mom's Music on Melwood Avenue, so if you're interested. The Adler Piano and Pump Organ Company was a musical instrument manufacturer on a large scale. They were founded in 1903 by lumber baron Cyrus Adler, who came to Louisville from Lyons, Kentucky, and along with a piano builder from the Mason Hamlin Company in Boston, Massachusetts, they started the Adler Piano and Pump Organ Company. At its peak in the late 1940s, this company had nearly 650 employees in 2 plants. The largest plant, located in upper left here at 2901 West Chestnut Street, was 260,000 square feet. They were marketed under the names Beckworth, Adler, Loretto, and Southern Grand. These instruments are collector's items today. Their main plant, 29th and Chestnut, and on the right, the piano tuning and calibration department. You know, when it comes to these photos, I got to take what I can get. So there you have it. This is the site of the Chestnut Street factory as it appears today. In the paint industry, Louisville was home to many paint manufacturers. In the realm of paint and varnish, I located 31 different manufacturers, including the Louisville Varnish Company, which was founded in 1883 with a final location on 15th Street. They had at their peak around 73 employees. The displayed slide shows the Curfew Paint Company at 201 East Market. Started in 1897, they were dissolved in 2013 as Curfew's Coatings. Their 140,000 square foot building shown here now houses many warehouses. Other notable paint companies with a Louisville presence included the Blatz Paint Company, Peasley Gaubert, which was a major player in the Portland area, and Paint and Varnish, and Porter Paint Company. Breweries and distilleries, beer and whiskey seems to be the lubrication that kept all those factory workers able to keep all those industries humming. At the Oldenburg Beer Museum some years ago near Cincinnati, it's gone now. I don't know what happened to Oldenburg, but I went to their museum and they had a huge display case with containers, cans, and bottles of just Louisville area breweries. I counted more than 150 different breweries, but when the Volstead Act was passed, 1919, there were only 10 operating breweries, down from the 67 that were described in the Encyclopedia of Louisville. In 1933, when things started to flow once again, there were only 3 breweries active, but things changed fast. And in fact, by 1929 or so, the federal government already had contacted many of the major breweries, advising them to start renovations because the end of Volstead was inevitable. Distillery-wise, several of the larger companies were never fully shut down because they were able, under license, to manufacture medicinal alcohol and industry-based alcohol-based solvents. Many foundries and iron companies have existed in our area since the early steamboat years, and the incursion of the railways had a lot to do with this. One of Louisville's early founders, meaning iron workers, was Charles Sneed, whose iron stamping plant was between 8th and 9th Street. This building, still extant, is known today as the Glassworks building because of the many glassblowers who have shops in it. Shown is Mr. Sneed's grave marker in Cave Hill Cemetery. Founded in 1852, they remained in business until the mid-1960s. Evidence of their work is replete throughout the city with manhole covers, steel doors, thresholds, spittoons, and more. They were world famous for the many diverse shelving units that they manufactured for the Library of Congress and many universities. There's Sneed tree enclosure. And these are all still downtown in Louisville. That's a business threshold. Shelvings. This is shelving for the Library of Congress. And this is at a university here. Sneed built shelving. Henry Vogt Manufacturing, I've discussed a little bit about them already, but a certain number of corporate industries or entities were so significant to this city that they formed an umbrella over nearly every other business. Henry Vogt and his brother Adam started with a machine shop in the 1400 block of Main Street West. The expanded operation was an industrial empire that spanned 10th Street to 12th, just south of Broadway, and extending to Ormsby Street. They manufactured gate valves, boilers, steel and iron products, and early refrigeration systems. Vogt refrigeration is still recognized today in the field of refrigeration. Louisville has a long history with the printing and bookbinding trades. Between printing and publishing, Louisville has supported over 150 different printing businesses. On the cover of my book, Made in Louisville, is a giant offset press with press operator at the Deering plant, the building which still stands today next to the Union Tark station. Charles T. Deering was a downtown bookseller who in 1864 began in the printing business. This handsome gentleman here, Benjamin Franklin Avery, came to Louisville from Aurora, New York. He left an indelible mark on this city, mainly in the farming equipment trade, with what became famous as the Avery plow. His first plant, opened in 1847, was at Preston and Main Street, but he soon built a larger plant on the northwest corner of 15th and Main. Eventually, the company started building the Avery tractor in a huge complex of buildings on 58 acres in the 1700 and 1800 blocks of 7th Street, employing as many as 1,000 skilled workers. Between B.F. Avery and his two sons, they were involved in the affairs of the city for around 110 years. And there's the complex. Some of it, get my pointer here. The Board of Education, JCPS, owns this little piece right here on the end, which they use to store maintenance equipment. All this has been demolished. The Peerless Electronics Company is about right there. But these buildings, the rest of these buildings for the most part, including the smaller buildings in the back, have virtually all been retrofitted to other businesses. And with adaptive reuse, it's become really a sort of a manufacturing hub in that area. 17 to 8 goes up to Industry Road from the 14th Street, what would be called the 14th Street. Some people would say there's no such thing as 14th Street, but we refer to it at times as 14th Street. From those railroad tracks up to Industry Road, or should I say the White Castle. Anyhow, B.F. Avery's wife, Susan Look Avery, was the founder of the Women's Club of Louisville. Their home sat on the property now occupied by the Hebron building on Broadway. Avery also owned a He also owned a train that came through Buechel at times. I brought my special stereo system just for that train. Their home sat on the property now occupied by the Hebron building on Broadway. Avery also owned a publishing house and printing facility for magazines on farming and farming methods. He also established a bank locally to enable farmers to purchase his products. The bank became known as Avery Federal Savings and Loan Company. The Avery Company closed in 1955. This gentleman, Theodore Ahrens Jr., similar to B.F. Avery, represents a vital part of the mosaic of Louisville-based industry. Ahrens began in the plumbing trades, working for his father's company, Ahrens and Ott, a major plumbing facility in the city. Founding the Standard Sanitary Company in 1900, he manufactured many products which would support the plumbing and other trades, including faucets, sinks, toilets, hydrants, and street washers. The company had many innovative firsts, including their famous chimes whistle for ships that would send a huge steam-generated blast that could be heard for a distance of more than 60 miles. By 1924, he employed some 5,000 workers, mostly at the plant that was located at 7th and Ship Streets. Oops. This is not the plant, which serves today as a parking garage for the University of Louisville. The company's headquarters, shown here, and warehouse was located on Broadway between Logan and Campbell Streets, the site of a family health clinic today, which our president of this organization, Mr. Steve Weiser, had a fundamental part in creating. Would that be safe to say? In 1925, along with Ethel Lovell and the Board of Education, Ahrens built and financed a trade school in downtown Louisville to support all of the various building trades. There's, as it appears today, this thing is hair trigger. Ahrens died in 1938. The vocational school was named for him a year later after his death. The company had merged in 1929 with the American Radiator Company of Ware, Massachusetts to become the American Standard Corporation of today. However, you can go on their website today and his name's not even mentioned, even though he created it. Such are the spoils of history. There's the main plant at 7th and Ship. It's a parking garage for U of L students and faculty, and someone suggested that they rename the street Ship that runs alongside of it there to Scholarship. So that's kind of a crazy idea. It never happened. They even had a company band, as so many industries did. Once again, music saves the day, folks. The candy trade. Another large industry in our area was that of candy manufacturing. There were over 20 candy factories. I'm not talking about the little mom and pop stores that sold just candy by the pound. Talking about huge factories in the Louisville area. Shown here is the Bradison Geens factory. This is the next slide. They were located at 817 South Floyd Street. The building still remains today and looks just about like that. They were in business from 1833 until the late 1960s. And you know, some of you may know who Edwin Geens was, who was involved with the Bradis and Gaines Company. Edwin Gaines became an educator, supported the Board of Education, and the Gaines Center on Preston is named for him. The Frank J. Men Company began in 1882 to manufacture their Eagle brand chocolates. Mr. Men, obviously, if you try to read this, had come to the U.S. from Germany and built his plant at Main Street in Wenzel. The site was later occupied by Plumber Supply Company of Louisville. National Candy Company, located at 14th and Broadway in 1925. They were probably the last of the huge candy factories. Wartime rationing, both World War I and II, of sugar and the absence of air conditioning were contributing causes to the decline of large-scale candy production. But this is not a totally sad story. This building is currently under adaptive reuse into apartments for senior citizens at this very moment. Muth Candy in so-called New Lou and Schimpf's in Jeffersonville are the two surviving purveyors of the candy trade in the Louisville area. Walter Girdler and the Girdler family, again, it's a family situation, contributed greatly to the industrial landscape of Louisville with a broad-based number of companies that supported industry generally. They also expanded into other areas nationally. The Girdler group of companies dotted the landscape of Louisville up to and including today. The first company started by Walter Girdler was the Kentucky Oxygen Hydrogen Company and the Helium Company of Louisville. Not something a lot of folks would have heard of, but it was very large and it was an unbelievable establishment. Girdler had perfected a method of extracting helium, a much needed gas for the World War II war effort for lighter-than-air blimps. His process was a technique to extract the needed helium from natural gas, a fairly complex process. After this, other companies, which he sold to the federal government, so it's not the spoils or whatever, he started these other companies, including Tube Turns, which that factory just came down at 29th and Broadway, Votator, Thermex, C&I Girdler, and more. Thomas Girdler, a cousin of Walter, was from Sellersburg, Indiana, but like his cousin Walter, he graduated from DuPont Manual High School. He later graduated from Lehigh University, becoming an expert in metallurgy. He soon became the president of Republic Steel near Chicago. From there, he became CEO of Consolidated Vultee Aircraft, involved in the development of the B-24 Liberator aircraft during World War II. William Girdler, born in 1947, was the grandson of Walter Girdler. He became a filmmaker and founded the motion picture company Studio One Productions in Louisville. Girdler had produced a number of his pictures here in the city, mostly using local talent, but moved to Hollywood where he produced 4 more motion pictures. Tony Curtis, Susan Strasberg, and Leslie Nielsen were some of the actors in his films. Unfortunately, his career was cut short when he was in a helicopter crash near Manila in the Philippines while scouting for film locations. He was just 30 years old. There are a number of websites in tribute to William Girdler and his film company. Here's the cover of one of them. He is buried in Cave Hill Cemetery. An excellent article about his life entitled Bill Girdler's Brief Candle by Alana Nash is available about his life. The American Doll Company was at one point one of the largest doll manufacturers in the United States. Their line included the famous Mama Talking Doll. They had several factory locations in Louisville, but mainly locations were in the 700 and 800 blocks of West Main Street. They also had a line of dolls built especially for the black population. They were in business in Louisville from 1911 until 1940. The making of baseball bats was a function of woodworkers who were known as turners. Of course, turners were busy building bedposts, wooden dowel rods, billy clubs, and other product components. But Hillerick and Bradsby Company, makers of the famous Louisville Slugger bat, was by no means the only maker of baseball bats in our city. Valentine Uhrig, 1861, who made mostly bungs for whiskey barrels, also made baseball bats. Another maker of baseball bats in Louisville was the Hilton Collins Company, whose bat, called the Louisville Mascot, was said to, quote, make happy batters. They were located at 2200 South 12th Street. ZFX Flying Effects. Any of you heard of this? This is a recent entry.
I've been here.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Marilyn, you need to tell us about this.
No.
How come you didn't call me and let me know? They build flying effects for theatrical and other productions with an employee base of about 50. They manufacture special rigging, harnesses, and choreography for many theaters worldwide. You know, companies like this are just beamed under the radar. They're out there and they're just so important to our economy and of such interest to the public. Maybe that's why you don't hear about them. But and here's another one, which is Omega National Products. They're now on Breckenridge Street. They were, I think, off of Baxter, but they moved recently. They're noted for many mirror-based products, but nationally, mostly for their mirror balls that are used in dance halls and auditoriums. Coffee bean and coffee production and microbreweries are two of the current day quote-unquote industries, and we have our share of them here in Louisville. Many of them, most of them I think I should say, are locally owned. So the nature of industry changes somewhat, and so I'm going to sign off here in a minute, but before doing so, I want you to know if you have any comments, questions, or indictments or whatever, just let me know and we'll carry this a little bit further. But before signing off, I'd like to offer a special tribute to this lady. She's been of interest to me for a long time in industry, in a sense. She so closely exemplified the spirit of following your dreams and ambitions. Eleanor Alberts, along with her brothers, Gisbert and Bruno, started growing specialty orchids in the backyard behind their house at 129 North Galt Avenue here in Louisville in 1916. The business soon flourished, allowing them to expand to 4318 Westport Road, where they operated 7 greenhouses with 50,000 blooming plants and 50,000 plants in the seedling stage. Eleanor became an acknowledged world expert in orchids, becoming head of the organ department at the Missouri Botanical Gardens in St. Louis. She married David H. Linder, a professor of botany at Harvard University. Sadly, she died in Boston at the age of 40 in 1938. Most of these industries that I have outlined here in this presentation were born out of the ambitions of others, just like Eleanor Alberts. some of the sources there. So Bob, how about it? Bob Dawson? Yeah.
Did Belknap Hardware ever manufacture its own brand of products? And if so, where was it?
They got into the business by manufacturing nails during World War I, or maybe even earlier.
Okay.
But that was their primary product, was nails, and they did a lot of things, products for the railroad and all that. They were a manufacturer before they were a wholesaler.
Okay.
So yeah.
And was that manufacturing on the site of their first headquarters, which was like the original, the golf house?
That building that you see where, today where Humana is,
Right.
and Steve, you can correct me on this, I don't think there was ever manufacturing there. I know that Louisville Tin and Stove, which was at 15th and Broadway, did a lot of the manufacturing for Belknap Hardware, a number of different products.
Okay.
They did have one small manufacturing plant, which was at, I'm going to say Clay and Main Street. One building. It's gone now. It was about a 6-story building where they had a manufacturing presence. I wouldn't say that they contributed greatly to Louisville manufacturing, but they were a factor, and they were certainly essential to our economy in the city of Louisville as a wholesaler and reseller of products. And they sold the stoves, of course, that Louisville Tin and Stove manufactured.
They had a lot of branded stuff. I know that because I've got a metal tape line that's got Brandeis on it. I mean, Belknap's on it. But like I said, they probably had somebody make them for them.
And just put their name on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a good question. Belknap was certainly important to the development of Louisville, and is, when I think of Humana, it kind of upsets me about what happened with the Belknap Hardware building. I don't want to go into it too much, but that is now a huge presence for Humana. And that big giant Humana building that they spend the